Eleanor froze as the words left Victoria's mouth. Everything is set. He will follow. The morning sun spilled over the living room, glinting off the polished oak floors and the carefully arranged breakfast table. Untouched except for the cup of coffee Eleanor had poured for herself, steam curling lazily upward. She watched from the doorway as Victoria adjusted her jacket, the subtle smile on her lips not reaching her eyes, and David, standing silently beside her, nodded as if agreeing to a script he barely understood. The house was quiet, the usual hum of the neighborhood replaced by an almost suffocating stillness that pressed against Eleanor's chest, making each breath deliberate. She moved to the kitchen counter, her hands brushing over the smooth surface, remembering the morning rituals she had maintained for decades, the small comforts that had once defined her home. The scent of brewed coffee mixed with the faint aroma of toast, yet the warmth that usually accompanied these sounds was absent. She could see Victoria's movements, deliberate and controlled, a choreography Eleanor had learned to read over the years, the slight hesitation in David's step betraying his internal conflict. Eleanor's mind drifted to the countless times she had hosted family breakfasts, the laughter that once filled these walls, now replaced by attention so subtle it almost felt like a living entity. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in calculation, noting the way Victoria's gaze flicked toward the hallway leading to the study, a signal Eleanor understood all too well. She sipped her coffee, the bitterness grounding her as she mentally traced the series of decisions that had led to this morning. Each step orchestrated, each word measured. David spoke softly, his tone almost apologetic as he mentioned a task he needed to attend to before the day's events. Yet he did not look at Eleanor, eyes fixed somewhere beyond her, on some unseen point of loyalty to Victoria's plan. Eleanor set down her cup, the clink against the saucer breaking the silence, and made her way to the window, observing the neighbor's yard, the children riding bicycles, a dog barking in the distance, ordinary life continuing outside her controlled sphere. Inside, the air seemed heavier, charged with unspoken intentions, and Eleanor felt the familiar mixture of disappointment and resolve coiling in her stomach. She straightened the folded napkins on the counter, aligning them perfectly, a small act of normalcy amidst the orchestrated chaos. Her thoughts wandered to the subtle signs over the past weeks, the small exclusions, the whispered remarks, the moments David had seemed unsure, hesitant, torn. Everything was converging on this day, the culmination of quiet manipulation and blind obedience. Eleanor's heart, though steady, felt the weight of years of trust and expectation being tested, and yet her face remained calm, expression neutral, the kind that belied the storm of insight and strategy brewing within. She watched Victoria and David move toward the door, the plan about to unfold, and Eleanor's gaze lingered on them with a calculated patience, aware that her next move, unseen and deliberate, would shift the balance. Even if the morning appeared mundane to any casual observer, the sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the floorboards, and Eleanor, standing tall, allowed a slow exhale, the only acknowledgement of the tension that filled the room. Every fiber of her awareness focused, prepared for the revelations that were about to surface, knowing that the quietest observer often held the greatest power. Eleanor moved quietly through the house, her footsteps muted against the polished hardwood, listening to the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The morning had unfolded with a calm that felt almost artificial, every sound amplified by the absence of the usual chatter and laughter. She set a small tray of breakfast items on the counter, arranging the silverware just so, noticing how the sunlight cast delicate patterns through the blinds onto the countertop. Each motion was deliberate, a ritual she had maintained for years to preserve a sense of normalcy. From the corner of her eye, she observed David hovering near the doorway, glancing at Victoria with an expression that suggested indecision, a fleeting hint of guilt in his posture, quickly masked by a forced composure. Eleanor sipped her tea, the warmth grounding her thoughts as she reflected on the subtle shifts she had observed over the past weeks. Missed calls, unexplained absences, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Her intuition, honed through decades of navigating family dynamics, urged caution. She moved to the living room, adjusting the cushions on the sofa, aligning the throw pillows with meticulous care. A silent exercise to maintain calm amidst the undercurrents of tension she could feel pressing against the walls. The air held the faint scent of polished wood and fresh linen, the ordinary aromas of a well-kept home. Yet there was a palpable stillness that seemed to thrum with unspoken words. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the framed photographs along the mantelpiece, reminders of moments once shared, now tinged with a quiet ache as she noted the subtle absence of interaction. The way David's eyes avoided her own, the way Victoria's smile never quite reached her eyes. She reached for the notepad on the side table, scribbling small reminders to herself, lists of tasks to occupy her mind, maintaining the rhythm of the household, while simultaneously scanning the patterns of behavior around her. Every movement of Victoria and David was catalogued silently, a gesture too precise, a glance too fleeting, a hesitation that spoke volumes. Eleanor's heart remained steady, her face neutral, but internally she was mapping out the landscape of the day, aware that what appeared to be ordinary would soon reveal the undercurrents she had long suspected. As she moved back to the kitchen to pour herself another cup of tea, she paused, noticing how the light shifted across the countertops, a small, calming observation that kept her grounded. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of leaves against the window, all contributed to a tapestry of normalcy, masking the careful surveillance Eleanor conducted. She set the cup down and straightened her posture, letting her eyes roam across the room, taking in the minute details, the angle of the curtains, the position of the chairs, the alignment of the tableware. Each element was a piece of the morning's puzzle, a subtle signal of patterns that, when interpreted correctly, would reveal the intention she suspected. Eleanor allowed herself a small, measured exhale, the only outward sign of the focus and awareness that occupied her mind. Every movement, every glance, every silence was recorded with precision. The ordinary morning transformed into a landscape of careful observation. She moved to the window once more, watching the world outside, children playing in the yard, a car passing slowly down the street, the ordinary rhythm of life contrasting sharply with the tension she sensed within her own home. Her awareness extended to the smallest details, the subtle interactions that might have seemed insignificant to others, each one contributing to the clarity she was gathering. The day was unfolding according to her understanding, and Eleanor, poised and alert, prepared for the moments when the true nature of the morning would come to light. Her composure a steady anchor in a sea of calculated actions and unspoken intentions. Eleanor moved toward the study, her footsteps soft yet deliberate, aware that each sound echoed slightly in the quiet house. The sunlight streamed through the half-open blinds, casting a pattern of lines across the polished wooden floor, highlighting the meticulous organization of the furniture she had maintained for years. David lingered near the desk, holding a set of papers, his brow furrowed as he scanned the documents, the subtle tension in his posture betraying the inner conflict he tried to mask. Victoria stood slightly behind him, adjusting a folder in her hands, the faintest edge of a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips, though her eyes darted occasionally toward Eleanor, acknowledging her presence without breaking composure. Eleanor observed them both, noting the minute details, the way David's fingers drummed lightly against the desk, the careful placement of Victoria's pen on the folder, the measured movements that suggested coordination yet hinted at unease. She poured herself another cup of tea from the pot she had brought with her, the liquid steaming gently as she carried it to the armchair near the window, sitting with a posture that conveyed calm authority. From her vantage point, she watched the small interactions, the barely audible exchange of words, the nods and slight gestures that seemed innocuous yet were laden with meaning. Eleanor's mind traced back through the past weeks, recalling the subtle exclusions at family gatherings, the whispered instructions, the quiet but persistent nudges that had steered David away from her influence and toward Victoria's agenda. Each recollection strengthened her resolve, the patterns fitting together with clarity, revealing the orchestration that had gone unnoticed until now. She sipped the tea, letting the warmth and mild bitterness sharpen her focus, her eyes scanning the room with quiet precision. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of birds outside, and the occasional car passing on the street created a backdrop of ordinary life, contrasting sharply with the strategic tension within the home. Eleanor adjusted the angle of the armchair, subtly shifting her perspective to observe the study doorway more clearly, noting how each movement of David and Victoria was synchronized in a way that seemed rehearsed. The room held a mixture of anticipation and restraint, Eleanor's awareness stretching to every corner, cataloging gestures and expressions, piecing together the true intention behind the day's unfolding events. She rested her hands gently on the cup, letting her breathing steady as she continued to watch, not reacting overtly, maintaining a composed exterior while internally evaluating every nuance, every subtle signal, understanding that patience and observation would provide her the insight necessary to respond appropriately when the right moment presented itself. The patterns of interaction, the controlled motions, and the hidden cues created a tableau of tension, Eleanor absorbing the scene with a quiet intensity, her mind working through possibilities, predictions, and the measured steps she would take, fully aware that the ordinary morning was anything but ordinary under the surface, and that the smallest observation might reveal the largest truth. Eleanor remained seated in the armchair, her hands folded neatly around the warm cup of tea, her gaze fixed on the subtle movements of David and Victoria as they organized papers and planned the day. The sunlight shifted gradually, sliding across the wooden floors and casting long, deliberate shadows that seemed to underscore the tension in the room. She noted the slight hesitation in David's gestures, the way his eyes flickered toward her briefly before dropping back to the documents, a silent signal of awareness mixed with uncertainty. Victoria moved with precision, arranging items as if every motion mattered, a controlled performance that contrasted with the faint nervous energy Eleanor sensed in David. Eleanor's mind traced back over the sequence of events that had led to this morning. The small exclusions, the whispered suggestions, the subtle manipulations that had gone unnoticed until now. Each action now fit into a coherent pattern, a quiet orchestration that revealed intention beneath the surface. She adjusted the napkin on her lap, the simple movement grounding her, allowing her to focus sharply on details others might miss. The angle of a pen, the way a folder was positioned, the small shift in posture that betrayed inner conflict. Eleanor observed the rhythm of their interaction, the timing of words and gestures, cataloging every element with careful attention. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside contrasted with the meticulous movements inside, highlighting the quiet orchestration of the morning. She considered the conversations of the past week, the minor comments and seemingly casual instructions that had guided David subtly, steering him toward Victoria's plan. Eleanor's thoughts were methodical, deliberate, mapping out the intention she could now see clearly, while her outward demeanor remained calm, composed, and unassuming. She let her eyes rest briefly on the framed photographs along the mantelpiece, each image a reminder of memories once shared, now reframed by the awareness of the manipulation at play. The ordinary morning carried an undercurrent of tension Eleanor understood fully, yet she did not allow it to disturb her measured composure. She shifted slightly in her seat, ensuring her perspective captured both David's and Victoria's positions, the subtle signs of anticipation, the quiet pauses, the almost imperceptible glances. Every detail contributed to the understanding Eleanor was gathering, each movement a piece of the complex puzzle she had been quietly observing. The warmth of the tea against her palms, the subtle patterns of light across the room, the ordinary household sounds all provided a steadying counterpoint to the intricate dynamics unfolding before her. Eleanor's awareness was complete, every interaction noted, every intention inferred, preparing her for the moments when clarity would demand her next move. Her mind calm, her judgment precise, ready to respond with measured insight to the orchestration she had long suspected and was now fully able to perceive. Eleanor rose from the armchair, her movements deliberate and unhurried, carrying the empty teacup back to the kitchen counter where she placed it precisely beside the matching saucer. The sunlight had shifted, bathing the living room in a warmer, golden light that softened the edges of the hardwood floors and cast elongated shadows along the walls. She walked slowly toward the hallway, pausing at the doorway to glance at David, who stood by the window, hands clasped loosely in front of him, his gaze tracing the patterns of the trees outside. Unaware of Eleanor's focused observation, Victoria adjusted a stack of folders on the side table, a measured tilt of her head revealing subtle satisfaction in the execution of her plan. Yet the slight tension in her shoulders betrayed her awareness that Eleanor was watching, noting, and calculating. Eleanor's mind traced the series of interactions from the past hours, recalling each small gesture, each measured phrase, the pauses between words that carried more weight than any spoken sentence. She considered the hidden cues that had guided David, the repeated nudges that had subtly aligned his actions with Victoria's intentions, and yet she observed the flicker of hesitation, the almost imperceptible uncertainty that surfaced despite the rehearsed exterior. Eleanor moved back to the living room, adjusting the throw pillows on the sofa with a quiet precision that brought a sense of control to the space, her eyes scanning the room for the smallest detail that might offer insight into the unfolding dynamics. She noticed the angle of the blinds, the way sunlight fell across the floorboards, how shadows shifted as David moved from one side of the room to the other, and the faint glimmer of reflection in the window that allowed her a second perspective on the interactions. Each observation was catalogued internally, Eleanor tracing intentions through the unspoken language of posture, glance, and timing. The house remained quiet except for the subtle background of distant traffic and the occasional bird call outside, ordinary sounds contrasting sharply with the deliberate orchestration inside. Eleanor allowed herself a small exhale, a gentle release of tension as she mapped the next steps, each one considered carefully, poised to respond in a manner that would assert clarity and insight without overt confrontation. She moved toward the desk, picking up a notepad and pen, arranging the pages in neat order as if aligning her thoughts physically on paper, while mentally running through scenarios and outcomes with measured precision. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the delicate sway of the curtains in the breeze, all seemed to fade into a quiet background as Eleanor's attention centered on the subtle exchanges between David and Victoria. Every glance, every subtle shift in weight, every moment of hesitation was noted with careful attention, her composure remaining calm and neutral outwardly, while inwardly a clear understanding of the day's orchestration formed. Eleanor straightened, placing the pen down deliberately, and took a final sweeping glance around the room, absorbing the tableau of interaction with quiet authority, ready to proceed with calculated observation and thoughtful response as the morning continued to unfold. Eleanor remained near the window, her posture composed yet alert, eyes following the subtle interactions between David and Victoria as the morning progressed. The light shifted, filling the room with a soft glow that highlighted the edges of the furniture and the careful arrangement of everyday objects that had become her markers of order. David leaned over the desk, pretending to review the papers, yet his movements betrayed hesitation, a fleeting glance toward Eleanor betraying awareness of her silent observation. Victoria adjusted a stack of documents, her fingers precise, movements calculated, though a slight tension at her jawline revealed the effort to maintain control over the day's plan. Eleanor's gaze swept across the room, noting the interplay of shadows on the floor, the way sunlight caught the corner of a picture frame, the small indicators that guided her understanding of intentions without confrontation. She took a measured step toward the center of the room, allowing her presence to be seen but not drawing attention to her scrutiny. Every movement deliberate and unobtrusive, a quiet assertion of awareness. Eleanor reflected on the series of cues that had led to this moment, each small act over the past weeks now forming a pattern, the strategic omissions, the carefully timed comments, the subtle redirections that had nudged David toward Victoria's guidance. Her hand rested lightly on the back of a chair, steadying herself, observing the micro-expressions, the almost imperceptible shifts in posture, and the unspoken signals that carried weight beyond their casual appearance. The air in the room was filled with the familiar sense of home, polished wood, and brewed coffee, comforting yet contrasted by the underlying tension Eleanor had been attuned to throughout the morning. She allowed her eyes to linger on the folded papers, the arranged pens, the alignment of the desk items, each small detail contributing to the clarity of understanding she had quietly built. Eleanor's thoughts traced potential outcomes, scenarios, and the sequence of actions she might take, all while maintaining a calm, measured exterior that revealed nothing of the depth of insight she had gained. She shifted her weight subtly, adjusting her stance to maximize her line of sight across the room, catching the faint reflection in the window of David's hand brushing lightly against Victoria's shoulder, the smallest of gestures laden with significance. Every observation reinforced the awareness that the ordinary appearance of the morning masked a carefully structured dynamic, one Eleanor had come to read with precision. She straightened the folds of her skirt, the gentle movement a signal of readiness, a composed anchor amidst the orchestrated flow of the household, her mind steady and focused, interpreting the unfolding moments with patience and discernment. The subtle background noises, the distant hum of a passing car, the occasional chirp of birds outside, the faint creak of a floorboard, served as markers of time, framing the quiet drama Eleanor was witnessing. She remained poised, each sense attentive, prepared to act in thought and strategy, maintaining composure, allowing the interactions of the day to reveal the true nature of intentions while keeping her own presence measured, calm, and observant. Eleanor remained seated in her chair, her hands resting lightly on the arms, eyes tracing the subtle movements of David and Victoria as they continued their quiet coordination across the room. The morning light had shifted higher, warming the wooden floors and illuminating the edges of the furniture, casting long, soft shadows that moved slowly with the sun. Eleanor's gaze followed each nuanced gesture, noting the way David's fingers hovered briefly over a document before pulling back, a slight pause that suggested uncertainty beneath his composed exterior. Victoria's posture was upright and controlled, her movements deliberate, yet Eleanor detected the faintest tension in her shoulders, a sign that despite her outward calm, she sensed the scrutiny Eleanor maintained. Eleanor sipped her tea, the warmth providing both comfort and clarity as her mind traced the sequence of cues she had collected, mapping the interactions with precise attention to detail. She considered the subtle cues of the past weeks, the whispered conversations, the soft redirections that had guided David into patterns that now aligned with Victoria's intentions. Each small signal now made sense in context, revealing the orchestration that had previously been hidden beneath the ordinary rhythm of the household. Eleanor adjusted the throw pillows on the sofa, aligning them perfectly, a small act of control and presence, reinforcing the calm that contrasted with the underlying tension. The room carried the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional distant car passing on the street, and the soft rustle of leaves outside, ordinary background sounds that contrasted sharply with the careful choreography within. Eleanor's eyes scanned the space, taking in the subtle interactions, cataloging every glance, every pause, every micro-expression as part of a larger pattern she now understood. Her posture remained composed, neutral, conveying calm authority without revealing the depth of her awareness or the calculations forming in her mind. She leaned back slightly, letting her gaze roam the room again, noting the alignment of furniture, the positioning of the folders and papers, and the rhythm of movement between David and Victoria, each element a signal contributing to her understanding. Eleanor reflected on her own history within this home, the long years of careful observation, the knowledge that quiet patience often revealed truths hidden to others. The ordinary morning, filled with sunlight and soft sounds, was now a stage upon which the true nature of intentions played out, and Eleanor, poised and deliberate, absorbed every detail with quiet intensity. Her mind traced possible sequences, potential decisions, and anticipated moments when actions would reveal the underlying motivations, while her exterior remained unshakable, calm, and measured. She allowed a small, deliberate exhale, acknowledging the tension, the orchestration, and the subtle anticipation, maintaining her awareness and preparedness, fully attuned to the movements, expressions, and interactions that define the unfolding dynamics of the morning. Eleanor stood by the window, her eyes tracing the subtle movements of David and Victoria as the late morning light stretched across the living room, illuminating the polished wooden floors and the carefully maintained arrangement of furniture and household items. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing on the street blended with the faint rustle of leaves outside, forming an ordinary backdrop against the extraordinary tension Eleanor observed. She sipped her tea slowly, allowing the warmth to steady her thoughts, her gaze sharp as she noted the slight hesitation in David's gestures, the way his fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the desk before pulling back, and the deliberate movements of Victoria as she adjusted a stack of folders with precise care. Eleanor's mind moved steadily through the sequence of cues she had collected, recalling whispered comments, small omissions, and gentle redirections over the past weeks, all now forming a coherent pattern of intention. She shifted slightly, letting her eyes capture the subtle expressions on their faces, the micro-expressions that revealed more than words ever could, each glance and tilt of the head contributing to the silent story unfolding before her. Eleanor moved closer to the center of the room, her posture calm and composed, carrying a presence that neither drew attention nor revealed the depth of her understanding. She observed the rhythm of their interactions, the timing of each motion, the pauses and subtle nods, interpreting them with precision, aware that even the smallest details could indicate the larger plan she had been quietly mapping. Her attention extended to the angle of sunlight across the floor, the reflection in the window, the alignment of the papers and objects in the room, every element serving as a marker for the dynamic she was deciphering. Eleanor allowed herself a controlled exhale, the only acknowledgement of the careful orchestration of actions around her, and adjusted the positioning of a chair slightly, a subtle act that reinforced her presence and awareness without confrontation. She reflected on the balance of patience and observation, understanding that the ordinary motions of the morning carried hidden significance, and that the clarity she had gained allowed her to predict the intention she now recognized. Eleanor's eyes roamed the room once more, cataloging gestures, expressions, and positioning with unwavering attention, each movement of David and Victoria analyzed and understood in the context of the larger unfolding scenario. She sipped her tea again, the warmth grounding her as she contemplated the next steps, fully aware that her quiet vigilance had brought her insight and control over the situation. The late morning sun shifted slowly, casting long shadows across the floor, and Eleanor remained poised, fully alert, her composure absolute, observing, analyzing, and preparing to respond with measured awareness as the interactions continued, every subtle cue noted and interpreted, ensuring that she maintained a clear understanding of the unfolding dynamics while remaining outwardly calm and seemingly neutral. Eleanor took a slow, deliberate step back from the window, her hands folding lightly in front of her as she allowed her gaze to sweep across the entire room one final time. The late morning sun filled the space with warmth, highlighting the careful arrangement of furniture and the subtle shadows cast by objects that had become markers of precision over the years. David remained near the desk, flipping through documents with the practiced motion of someone following a routine, yet Eleanor noticed the brief hesitations, the slight furrow in his brow, moments that revealed his internal awareness of the observation she maintained. Victoria adjusted a chair by the side table, her movements deliberate, her posture upright, but Eleanor detected the tension in the subtle tightening of her shoulders, a silent acknowledgement that her presence was being monitored. Eleanor's mind moved steadily through the sequence of interactions, tracing the series of small manipulations and nuanced gestures that had been layered over the past weeks, each piece now forming a clear picture of the orchestration she had quietly discerned. She stepped toward the center of the room, the polished floorboards cool beneath her feet, and allowed her eyes to capture the precise alignment of papers, folders, and objects that, while ordinary to an untrained eye, now appeared as signals of intention and control. Eleanor noted the tiny micro-expressions on David's face as he glanced briefly at Victoria, the subtle shifts in posture, the timing of gestures, all catalogued with quiet precision. She shifted slightly, adjusting her stance to maintain an unobstructed view of their interactions, allowing her awareness to encompass both the spoken and unspoken language unfolding before her. The gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic on the street provided a background rhythm that contrasted with the meticulous choreography within the room. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the patterns of light and shadow, the reflections in the windows, and the positioning of every element in the room, each detail contributing to the understanding she had methodically built. She allowed herself a measured breath, her posture calm, her face neutral, as she observed the culmination of the morning's interactions, aware of the subtle but undeniable tension that had guided each movement. Every pause, glance, and deliberate action of David and Victoria was noted, analyzed, and internalized, providing Eleanor with clarity and control over the unfolding situation. She stood with composed patience, the quiet authority of presence asserting itself without a word, absorbing the dynamics fully, her mind prepared to act with precision if necessary, yet content to let the interactions reveal their intentions naturally. The sun shifted further, elongating the shadows across the floor, and Eleanor remained poised, fully attuned to the room, cataloging every nuance, and ready to navigate the situation with the insight and calm that had defined her understanding of the household for decades.